My son blocked me at the stairs and said I wasn't allowed upstairs in my own house. He didn't know the hidden camera in that room was live streaming his crime. The heavy palm of my only son slammed against my chest on the third step of the staircase, stopping me dead in my tracks. I had just walked through the front door of the house I spent 34 years paying off, tired from a 12-hour workday, only to find my own flesh and blood staring down at me like an armed guard standing at a border checkpoint. Ethan didn't even blink. He leaned in, lowered his voice to a menacing whisper, and said, "You are not going upstairs tonight, Dad. Chloe's family is up there right now, and they need complete privacy. Go find somewhere else to sleep." What my son didn't know was that every single word spoken behind that locked door upstairs was already being recorded in high definition on my phone, and his little empire was about to crumble before midnight. The air in the hallway was freezing because someone had left the patio door wide open, letting the wet November draft sweep straight through the house. Mixed into that chill was the nauseating stench of heavy, artificial floral perfume, the exact cheap scent worn by Chloe's mother, Brenda. From directly above my head came the harsh, grinding noise of heavy oak furniture being dragged across hardwood floors. That noise made my heart drop into my stomach. It was coming from Eleanor's private study. Eleanor was my wife, who had passed away 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Since the morning she died, I had not moved a single book, a single photograph, or a single pen from her desk. That room was the only sacred space left in my entire life. I looked up at Ethan. He was 31 years old, wearing a custom jacket I had bought him for his last birthday, standing tall on the third wooden step so he could look down on me. His fingers gripped the banister so hard his knuckles turned white, but his eyes were totally cold. There was no affection, no gratitude, and no respect in his expression, just pure, unadulterated arrogance. I didn't shove his hand off my chest, and I didn't shout. During my 40 years working as a senior corporate audit director, I learned one fundamental law of survival. The moment you raise your voice, you surrender your power. The man who stays quiet is the man who is calculating the exact weight of the trap. I looked past Ethan's shoulder. Through the wooden vertical railings of the banister, I saw a pair of filthy, mud-caked work boots sitting right on the hallway runner outside Eleanor's door. They belonged to Donald, Chloe's father, a man who had spent his entire life jumping from one bankrupt construction scheme to another, always looking for a shortcut to someone else's money. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice down to a dead, flat whisper. "Ethan, why is your father-in-law inside your mother's personal study?" Ethan didn't flinch. He actually smirked, curling the right corner of his mouth upward in a sneer that made him look like a total stranger. "It isn't Mom's study anymore, Dad," he said casually, taking a step down to push his palm harder against my chest. "And honestly, if you keep acting so stubborn every single day, this isn't going to be your house for much longer either. Times have changed. You need to accept that you're old, you're out of touch, and you don't make the rules here." Those words hit me like a physical impact, but they didn't break me. They gave me absolute clarity. For months, I had been telling myself that Ethan was just stressed about his job at the financial brokerage. I had forgiven his short temper, his sudden mood swings, and the way his wife Chloe treated our home like a luxury hotel where I was merely an unpaid butler. 2 years ago, when Ethan lost over $80,000 in a reckless online trading venture, I opened my doors to him and Chloe. I told them they could stay for 6 months, rent-free, so they could get back on their feet. 6 months quietly stretched into 2 full years. They paid for nothing. They didn't buy groceries, they didn't pay utility bills, and they didn't even clean up after themselves. At first, Ethan was humble. He used to thank me every time I made breakfast. But human greed doesn't explode overnight. It rots a person's character inch by inch. About 6 months ago, I started noticing subtle shifts in his behavior. When neighbors walked by the front porch, Ethan would raise his voice and talk about the property as if he were the sole owner. He started taking my mail directly from the postman before I could get to it, claiming he was just trying to help me avoid managing confusing paperwork. 3 weeks ago, he changed the main master lock on the garage without handing me a spare key, claiming he had misplaced the extra set. I stepped backward, taking my foot off the first step and standing firmly on the living room rug. Ethan smiled, taking my step backward as a sign of defeat. He let his hand drop to his side, straightened his cuffs, and adjusted his posture like a landlord who had successfully disciplined a noisy tenant. "That's better," Ethan said with a soft, condescending chuckle. "Go heat yourself up some tea in the kitchen, Dad. Don't make a scene. We have important business guests upstairs, and we don't need you wandering around confusing everyone." He turned his back on me and walked back up the stairs, his footsteps heavy and confident. He truly believed he had won. He believed that a 62-year-old man, heartbroken over the loss of his wife and tired from years of hard labor, was simply too exhausted to fight back. What Ethan had completely forgotten was a tiny detail from 4 years ago. When Eleanor was still alive, she had worried about the security of her rare coin collection and our original family estate documents. To put her mind at ease, I had hired a professional security firm to install a tiny, high-definition pinhole camera hidden inside the frame of a landscape painting hanging directly across from Eleanor's desk. It was wired directly into a secure cloud server, and the app was still running on my smartphone. I walked into the dark kitchen, avoiding the overhead light. I didn't shed a single tear. The deep, agonizing pain of being betrayed by your only child is something no words can accurately describe. But I channeled that pain into cold, surgical focus. I pulled my smartphone out of my coat pocket, unlocked the screen, and tapped on the encrypted security app. The high-definition live video feed popped up instantly on my screen, complete with crystal-clear audio streaming through my wireless earpiece. What I saw inside Eleanor's study made my jaw set tight. Donald, Chloe's father, was crouched down beside Eleanor's dark mahogany desk with a set of steel crowbars and heavy manual screwdrivers. He was actively forcing open the locked bottom drawers where I kept my personal legal records. Chloe was standing right beside him, holding her phone camera high, taking crisp photographs of every page of my property title deeds, property tax receipts, and personal bank statements. Her younger brother Mason was standing by the bookshelf, using a digital laser measuring tape to take exact dimensions of the room's layout. Ethan walked into the frame, closing the study door tightly behind him. He walked straight over to the desk, picked up a thick folder bound in blue plastic, and tossed it onto the desk in front of Donald. "Did you find the original deed?" Ethan asked, his voice coming through my earpiece with terrifying clarity. Donald spat on the floor, wiping grease from his hands onto his trousers. "Yeah, it was in the middle drawer. The old man still has his name listed as the sole owner on the primary title. If we want the bank to release the $650,000 commercial development loan by Friday, we need his signature on this personal guarantee form, or we need the power of attorney document to be fully active." Chloe scoffed, tossing her long hair over her shoulder. "He is never going to sign a $650,000 guarantee, Dad. You know how stubborn he is. He freaked out last month when I just suggested painting the living room walls. He treats this whole place like a museum for Eleanor." Ethan let out a cold, sharp laugh that chilled me to the bone. "It doesn't matter what he wants anymore, Chloe. Look at this document. I drafted the updated durable power of attorney paperwork last week using a legal template. I signed his name at the bottom yesterday afternoon. The notary public at my office is a guy who owes me a huge favor from a bad stock tip I covered for him. He notarized it this morning without your father even being in the room." Donald looked up from the desk, his bushy eyebrows furrowing. "Are you sure this is airtight, Ethan? If the old man realizes what you did and calls the police or goes to a lawyer, signature forgery on a real estate mortgage application is a serious felony. I'm not taking the fall for you if this whole thing blows up in our faces." "He isn't going to call anybody," Ethan replied with complete certainty, leaning back against Eleanor's desk, the very desk where his mother used to help him with his middle school algebra homework. "I've been setting the foundation for this for 4 months. I told the neighbors he's showing early signs of severe cognitive decline and memory loss. I've been taking his mail, keeping his bank statements hidden, and keeping him isolated. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'm meeting the loan officer at the bank. I'm submitting the notarized power of attorney, putting this house up as primary collateral, and securing the $650,000. Once the funds hit our joint account, we start construction on the commercial property downtown." Chloe leaned over and wrapped her arms around Ethan's neck, kissing his cheek. "And what about your dad? Where is he going to live once we tear out the second floor to build my parents' guest suite?" "There's a quiet, assisted living facility 2 towns over. Ethan said, without a shred of emotion in his voice. It costs about $2,800 a month. We can pay for his room out of the loan proceeds for the first 6 months. After that, he can rely on his small state pension. He won't have a say in the matter anyway, once the bank files the lien against the house. Inside Eleanor's study, Chloe reached over and picked up a small, handcrafted velvet box resting on the corner of the desk. Inside that box were the handwritten letters Eleanor and I had sent to each other while I was deployed overseas in my youth, along with her original silver wedding ring. Chloe opened the lid, skimmed through the fragile yellow pages, and let out an impatient sigh. Look at all this old trash taking up space. Mason, bring a heavy black trash bag up here when you come back up. We need to clear out all these useless memories before the bank's property appraiser arrives on Thursday. Hearing those words, something inside me changed forever. The final shred of paternal leniency vanished, replaced by an absolute, unshakable determination to execute total legal devastation. They thought they were dealing with a helpless, confused old father who would quietly step aside and let them strip his life down to the bone. They had completely forgotten that before I retired, I spent 4 decades directing forensic audits for major corporations, dissecting complex financial frauds, and destroying dishonest executives who thought they were smarter than the law. I stepped back into the kitchen pantry, opened the concealed wall safe hidden behind the spice rack, and pulled out my primary backup hard drive and my original legal files. I plugged my phone into my portable power bank, opened my secure legal communications portal, and made a direct call to Raymond Cross. Raymond was my oldest friend, a top-tier senior trial attorney specializing in elder financial exploitation, property fraud, and high-stakes asset protection. The phone rang twice before Raymond answered. His voice was deep and steady. Douglas, it's almost 9 at night. Is everything all right? Raymond, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, keeping my tone completely level. My son, his wife, and her family are upstairs in my house right now. They have broken into my late wife's locked study. They have forged my signature on a durable power of attorney document to secure a $650,000 loan against my home, and they plan to submit the fraudulent paperwork to First National Bank at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. There was a brief pause on the line as Raymond absorbed the information. Do you have concrete proof of the forgery and the breaking and entering, Douglas? Or is this currently your word against his? I have live cloud-recorded video footage with full audio capturing the entire conversation, the breaking of the desk locks, the photographic theft of my title deeds, and my son explicitly admitting to forging my signature and bribing a corrupt notary public, I replied quietly. The raw video files are already uploading to your firm's secure cloud server as we speak. Raymond let out a low whistle over the line. That isn't just a civil property dispute, Douglas. That is grand larceny, identity theft, commercial mortgage fraud, and unlawful entry. What do you want to do? I want total financial, legal, and operational destruction of their plan before midnight, I said firmly. I want the loan frozen, the forged power of attorney permanently invalidated, an emergency injunction placed on all shared accounts, an irrevocable trust created to protect this entire estate, and formal eviction notices served immediately. I am not waiting for tomorrow morning. Give me 45 minutes, Raymond replied without hesitation. I am calling 2 of my senior associates right now. We are drafting the emergency revocation notices, filing an immediate fraud alert directly with the regional vice president of compliance at First National Bank, who happens to owe my firm a massive professional favor, and heading over to your house with an official legal courier. Do not engage in a physical altercation with them. Just let them hang themselves. Understood, I said. After hanging up with Raymond, I didn't just sit there waiting. I took immediate, precise countermeasures from my phone. First, I logged into my personal online banking portal. Over the past 2 years, I had allowed Ethan to hold a supplementary debit card attached to my secondary household expense account, which usually held around $12,000 for routine bills. I immediately revoked his authorization, canceled the card, and transferred every single dollar out of that account into a newly created, isolated account under my sole name. Next, I opened my personal credit line portal and completely locked down my $300,000 home equity line of credit, changing all primary authorization passcodes, security questions, and emergency contact phone numbers. Then I drafted an urgent electronic notice to the State Secretary's Division of Licensing, reporting the specific notary public whom Ethan had mentioned on video for executing a fraudulent notarization without the principal party present. By 9:45 that evening, every single line of credit, every financial pathway, and every legal vulnerability Ethan thought he could exploit had been completely shut down. Upstairs, the heavy footsteps began moving down the hallway again. I heard Chloe's high-pitched laughter echoing down the staircase, followed by Donald's rough, booming voice as they all headed toward the dining room. They were ready to celebrate their upcoming financial victory with a fine bottle of wine. I calmly walked out of the kitchen and entered the formal dining room. The sight that met my eyes was enough to make any homeowner's blood boil. Donald was sitting at the head of my mahogany dining table, the seat where I had sat for over 30 years. Chloe had pulled out Eleanor's finest gold-rimmed crystal glassware, glasses we only used for special family anniversaries, and was pouring expensive red wine for her brother Mason and her mother Brenda. Ethan was leaning against the sideboard, holding a glass, looking like a triumphant emperor surveying his newly conquered land. "Well, look who finally came out of the dark," Donald sneered, raising his glass of my 30-year-old scotch toward me. "Don't worry, Douglas. We left some leftovers in the fridge for you. We're having a little private family meeting here to discuss future property investments." I didn't answer Donald. I didn't even look at him. I walked over to the side of the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down calmly at the foot of the table. I folded my hands together on the polished wood and looked directly at my son. "Ethan," I said quietly, "did you manage to double-check all the details on your mortgage application for tomorrow morning?" Ethan's face darkened slightly, surprised by my direct question. He took a slow sip of his drink, trying to maintain his cool posture. "I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. I told you, you don't need to stress your head about complicated financial stuff anymore. I'm taking care of the family business from now on." "Is that why your supplementary card was just declined 5 minutes ago, when the automated system attempted to charge the $750 loan processing fee?" I asked smoothly. Ethan froze. His glass stayed hovering right in front of his lips. "What did you just say?" He quickly pulled his phone out of his pocket. His thumb swiped across the screen frantically. A bright red notification banner popped up on his display, confirming that his secondary card had been permanently terminated and his access to the primary household funds had been completely revoked. "What the hell did you do to the account, Dad?" Ethan shouted, his calm facade instantly shattering into raw panic. He slammed his crystal glass onto the table so hard that red wine splashed across the white tablecloth. "That card was supposed to cover the application fee and the appraisal deposit tonight. Why did you lock me out?" Chloe stood up from her chair, her face red with anger. "Are you serious, Douglas? Ethan is trying to build a business that will secure all of our futures, and you're playing petty mind games with the bank accounts? How selfish can an old man be?" I looked Chloe straight in the eye, my voice dropping an octave lower, heavy with cold authority. "Selfish? A woman who enters my home as a guest, breaks into my deceased wife's locked study, photographs my private deeds, and refers to 40 years of my family's sacred memories as sentimental garbage, has no right to speak the word selfish in my presence." The entire dining room went completely silent. Chloe gasped, her face draining of color instantly. Donald slowed his chewing, his heavy jaw dropping slightly as he stared at me in shock. Ethan took 2 fast steps toward me, his chest heaving with rage. "Have you been spying on us? Did you go into our room?" "I didn't need to step a single foot upstairs, Ethan," I said, pulling my smartphone out and placing it flat on the center of the table. I pressed the play button on the recorded video file. Immediately, Ethan's own voice echoed loudly through the dining room speaker. "It doesn't matter what he wants anymore, Chloe. I drafted the updated durable power of attorney paperwork last week. I signed his name at the bottom yesterday afternoon. The notary public owes me a favor. We can put this house up as primary collateral." The audio played with terrifying clarity. Every word, every laugh, every detail of their fraudulent plan rang out like a solemn death sentence inside that room. Donald jumped to his feet so fast his chair fell backward onto the rug, making a loud crash. He turned on Ethan instantly, pointing a trembling, thick finger directly at his son-in-law's face. "You stupid idiot. You told me your old man had explicitly agreed to put the house up as collateral. You told me he signed the power of attorney himself. You forged his signature on a federal bank application. Dad, calm down, Chloe screamed, panic taking over her voice. Ethan said it was totally safe. Safe? Donald roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Forging a signature on a commercial real estate loan application is a federal crime. If the bank uncovers this, every single person who signed as an officer on the new development company is going to be dragged into a criminal fraud investigation. You dragged my family into a felony. I did it for us, Ethan yelled back, his hands shaking violently as he tried to defend himself. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying mix of fear and hatred. Dad, listen to me. You don't understand how much pressure I was under. The firm was going to demote me if I didn't bring in new capital this quarter. I owed $42,000 to private lenders. I was going to pay the mortgage back before you ever even noticed. I'm your only son. You can't do this to me. You didn't do this because you were under pressure, Ethan, I said, rising slowly from my chair and standing at my full height. You did this because you became greedy, lazy, and arrogant. You looked at your father, a man who gave you everything, and saw nothing more than an old obstacle standing between you and a quick payout. Before Ethan could answer, the loud, sharp ring of the front doorbell echoed through the house. It wasn't a soft ring. It was two firm, authoritative chimes that signaled the arrival of absolute accountability. I walked past the terrified, arguing family and opened the front door. Raymond Cross stood on the porch in a dark gray wool overcoat, holding a thick leather briefcase. Beside him stood a uniformed legal process server, holding 3 sealed manila document packets. Good evening, Douglas, Raymond said clearly, stepping straight into the entryway without waiting for an invitation. He looked past me toward the dining room, taking in the scene of total chaos with cold, professional eyes. The legal process server walked straight into the dining room and placed 3 officially stamped legal packets flat on the dining table right in front of Ethan, Chloe, and Donald. Raymond opened his briefcase, pulled out a series of legal notices bearing official court seals, and laid them out one by one. My name is Raymond Cross, senior legal counsel representing Mr. Douglas Thorne, Raymond announced, his voice booming through the house with absolute authority. As of 8:45 this evening, a formal emergency revocation of all powers of attorney has been officially filed with the county clerk and served directly to the compliance department at First National Bank. Any attempt to use Mr. Thorne's name, signature, or property as collateral will result in immediate criminal prosecution for grand fraud. Ethan stared at the documents, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Raymond, please. This is just an internal family misunderstanding. We can fix this. This is not a misunderstanding, Mr. Thorne, Raymond replied coldly. This is an official notice of investigation for signature forgery and unlawful property trespass. Furthermore, I have personally delivered a formal fraud notification to the Internal Affairs Unit at your financial brokerage regarding the unauthorized creation of corporate loan instruments. An internal audit of your trading accounts will commence at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Ethan collapsed back into his chair as if he had been struck by a sledgehammer. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. And finally, Raymond continued, pulling out the last document from his file, this is a formal demand to quit and order of eviction. Under state emergency asset protection laws for vulnerable adults, your right of occupancy in this residence is terminated immediately. You, your wife, and her relatives have exactly 30 days to remove your personal items from these premises. Effective immediately, you are barred from entering the second-floor study, and a private security guard will be stationed outside this house, starting at midnight. Chloe burst into uncontrollable tears, grabbing her husband's arm and shaking him violently. Ethan, do something! Speak to him! They are going to audit your accounts! We're going to lose everything! Ethan looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears of rage and desperation. Dad, please. If they audit my accounts at work, I'm going to lose my license. I could go to prison. How can a father do this to his own son over a stupid house? Where is your heart? I looked down at my son. My heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces, but my mind remained absolute steel. My heart was in this house, Ethan. It was in the letters your mother wrote me that your wife called garbage. It was in the 34 years of hard labor I put in to give you a comfortable life. You didn't just try to take my house, Ethan. You tried to erase my dignity, my sanity, and my memory while I was still alive. Donald didn't say another word. He grabbed his jacket, grabbed his daughter by the arm, and practically dragged her toward the front door, desperate to distance himself from Ethan before the legal hammer dropped completely. Mason followed right behind them, leaving his sister and brother-in-law to face the wreckage alone. Within 2 weeks, the dominoes fell with terrifying speed. First National Bank formally rejected the loan application and launched an internal investigation into the forged power of attorney. Ethan's financial brokerage fired him immediately for gross ethical violations and fraud, revoking his trading licenses permanently. Deprived of the money they thought they were going to steal, Chloe filed for divorce less than a month later, packing her bags and leaving Ethan with over $90,000 in personal debt and zero income. 6 months after that cold November night, the final legal step was completed. I met with Raymond at his downtown office to execute the final paperwork for the Eleanor Thorne Foundation, an irrevocable real estate trust. I officially transferred the ownership of my home into the trust. Upon my passing, the house will never be sold, commercialized, or inherited by any individual. Instead, it will serve as a permanent, fully funded community legal aid center dedicated to helping elderly individuals protect their homes and assets from abusive, greedy family members. Eleanor's study upstairs remains completely untouched, preserved exactly as it was, serving as the central archive for the foundation. Late one afternoon in early October, nearly a year after the incident, my front doorbell rang again. I walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch under a light autumn drizzle was Ethan. He looked completely different. He was thin, his hair was messy, and he was wearing a cheap, faded coat. The arrogant posture he used to carry on the staircase was completely gone. His shoulders were hunched, and his eyes were hollowed out by months of struggle. He was currently working a low-paying night shift at a logistics warehouse just to pay off his legal defense fees and avoid jail time. He stood on the porch, shivering slightly in the cold wind, looking at me through the screen door. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "I don't have enough money for rent this month. My landlord is throwing me out on Tuesday. I've been going to court every week, and I don't have anyone left to turn to. Can I please just come home? I'll sleep on the couch in the basement."
"I'll do whatever you want. I just need a place to stay." I looked at my son standing in the rain. A huge part of me, the part that remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle on the driveway, wanted to open the door, wrap a warm blanket around his shoulders, and tell him everything was going to be all right. But real love does not enable destruction, and true justice does not offer easy shortcuts for people who only repent when they run out of options. "Ethan," I said softly, my voice calm and steady, "forgiveness is something I work on in my prayers every single day for my own peace of mind. But forgiveness does not mean giving you another key to the house you tried to steal." Ethan looked at me, tears welling up in his hollow eyes. "So that's it? You're really going to let your only son stay out in the cold? I will pay your rent for a small studio apartment for 2 months directly to the landlord, and I will pay for your legal representation to complete your probation program," I replied firmly. "I will help you survive, Ethan, because you are my son. But you will never step foot inside this house again, and you will never inherit a single brick of this estate. You must learn to build your own life with honest hands." He stared at me for a long moment, realizing finally that no amount of guilt, manipulation, or begging would ever shake my resolve again. He slowly turned around, pulled his hood over his head, and walked down the porch steps into the gray rain. I watched him go until he reached the street. Then I stepped back inside, closed the heavy oak front door, and locked it. I walked upstairs, entered Eleanor's study, sat down at her mahogany desk, and looked out the window at the peaceful garden below. The house was quiet, safe, and restored to its true purpose.